You have been taught that Antarctica is a desolate wasteland discovered by humanity in 1820, but trust me, the truth about this frozen continent has been gathering dust on a piece of gazelle skin since long before that, 3 centuries before. In 1929, while clearing out the clutter in the Istanbul palace, a map drawn by Admiral Piri Reis in 1513 was found. Do you know what the crazy part is? It depicts the coastline of Antarctica with precision. Not the harmless sheet of white ice we see today, but mountains and bays lying deep beneath miles of thick ice. Something modern science had to wait until 1949 and use seismic technology to dare confirm. How could a 16th century admiral look through the permafrost without a satellite? Piri Reis confessed that he only copied it from even more ancient maps connected to Alexander the Great, and the distinctive symbols of a notorious secret society, the Knights Templar. Think about it. In 1307, on that fateful Friday the 13th, when King Philip IV of France wanted to burn the knights at the stake to steal their gold reserves, 18 Templar ships quietly vaporized from the port of La Rochelle. Mainstream history says they died or disbanded. How naive. They were the holders of the First International Bank, brilliant navigators possessing knowledge ahead of their time. Could it be that they set sail for the south, not to seek gold, but to hide something more precious than gold? A royal bloodline that needed protection at the ends of the earth, a place where death awaits anyone who dares to approach? Antarctica is not a dead land, it is a fortress. From parchment skins depicting the world before the Ice Age to the mysterious disappearance of the Templar fleet, it seems history is not only written by the victors but also hidden by the survivors. Welcome, you skeptics, to Dark History. I am Zorro. Pull your chair closer. Today we are going to peel back this layer of permafrost. History is not what is written in textbooks. History is what remains after the victors have burned all the evidence. But sometimes, the fire misses a few things. A scrap of parchment, a ship disappearing into the fog, a map depicting things that cannot possibly exist. Today we aren't talking about heroes. We are talking about the greatest, and perhaps the maddest, escape in human history. Pull your chair closer, because this story will send chills down your spine. Literally. Let's turn back time to 1929, Istanbul, Turkey. Topkapi Palace is under renovation. Dust covers the marble corridors. Workers, while cleaning out a forgotten archive, found something that should have rotted away long ago. A map drawn on gazelle skin. It was signed in the year 1513 by an Ottoman Navy admiral named Piri Reis. At first glance, it's just a beautiful nautical chart with small ships, sea monsters, and the coastlines of South America and Africa. But when experts looked closer at the bottom of the skin, they stopped breathing. It depicts Antarctica. But wait, don't scroll past this detail too quickly. It doesn't just draw a white lump of ice. It draws the coastline of Antarctica. The mountains, the bays, the creeks. What is the problem here? Antarctica was officially discovered in 1820. But even scarier, the geographical features Piri Reis drew are currently lying under miles of thick ice. They were buried during the Ice Age thousands of years ago. In 1949, a British-Swedish seismic survey team went to Antarctica, used sonar technology to penetrate the ice, and confirmed, my God, the mountains under the ice are actually in the exact position that the damn 1513 map depicted. How? How could a Turkish admiral, sitting in his study in the 16th century, know the shape of a continent before it was frozen? Piri Reis was not a prophet. He was an honest man. In his marginal notes, he confessed, I did not draw this. I copied it. He compiled it from 20 older maps, some from the time of Alexander the Great, and some obtained from mysterious Western sailors. And this is where our story shifts from weird to dangerous. On some of the source maps Piri Reis used, distinct symbols were found: red crosses, sacred geometry, the mark of an organization whose name evokes wealth, power, and the bloodiest downfall of the Middle Ages, the Knights Templar. Why would a military order, guys known for protecting pilgrims in scorching Jerusalem, hold the key to a frozen continent at the ends of the earth? What do you think of when you hear Knights Templar? Men in white cloaks with red crosses, swinging swords and killing in the name of God. That is the surface. Let me tell you who they really were. They were the world's first multinational corporation. From 1119 to 1307, they didn't just fight. They became bankers. They invented the promissory note, the grandfather of today's credit card. You deposit gold in Paris, receive an encoded piece of paper, and withdraw gold in Jerusalem. They were obscenely wealthy. They lent money to kings. They owned a massive naval fleet rivaling that of any nation. And most importantly, they were obsessed with knowledge. During their occupation of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, believed to be built on the ruins of Solomon's temple, they dug, not to find gold, but to find something more valuable: ancient knowledge. Rumor has it they found texts from ancient Egypt, nautical charts of the Phoenicians, those who sailed the seas thousands of years ago. Knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and geography that Europe at that time, still slumbering, could not even dream of. The Knights Templar knew the Earth was round 100 years before Columbus set sail. And perhaps, just perhaps, they knew that in the far south there was a land called Terra Australis Incognita. But why would they need such a desolate land? Why care about a place where birds don't even bother to land? Because they knew their end was coming. Imagine you are in France, October 1307. King Philip IV of France, also known as Philip the Fair, but his soul was incredibly ugly, is broke. He owes the Templars a massive sum that even selling the entire kingdom of France couldn't repay. What is the fastest way to clear a debt? Kill the creditor. Philip hatched a meticulous plan, a simultaneous raid across all of France. Orders were sealed, sent to every official with the words, "To be opened only at dawn on October 13th. That day was a Friday, Friday the 13th, the origin of the bad luck we still fear to this day. Dawn broke. Royal soldiers broke down monastery doors. They dragged knights out of bed. Accusations, heresy, worshipping the demon Baphomet, homosexuality, spitting on the cross. But there was a problem. When Philip's soldiers stormed the Templar treasury in Paris, it was empty. When they checked the ports, they realized they were too late. At the port of La Rochelle, the main naval base of the order, 18 giant galley ships had vanished, leaving not a single trace. Where did they go? Mainstream history is silent. Some say they went to Scotland to help Robert the Bruce. Others say Portugal. But let's use a bit of logic. If you were the most wanted fugitive in the world, hunted by both the church and kings, would you hide in Europe? No. You need to disappear. You need a place where no one dares to go. You need a place not on the enemy's map. Before I take you down to the frozen hell where these ships might have docked, I want to ask you one thing. Where are you watching this video? Are you curled up in a warm blanket in Hanoi? Or sitting at a cafe in Saigon? Or are you sneaking a watch during work hours in California? Leave a comment below. Tell me where you are and what time it is. because the men on those 18 ships, they no longer had a concept of time. They were entering the land of eternal darkness. And if you are someone who likes to peel apart the lies of history, hit the subscribe button right now. This channel is a shelter for truth seekers like you. Don't make me come looking for you like King Philip looked for the Templars. Back to 1307. Those who stayed behind were not as lucky as those who set sail. In Paris, Philip IV's inquisitors began their work, and they were very good at it. Strappado, hanging hands tied behind the back until the shoulder joints dislocate. The rack, stretching the body until bones separate from flesh. Burning feet with hot coals. Under these tortures, Grand Master Jacques de Molay and the knights confessed. They admitted to every disgusting crime the king accused them of. But pay attention to this. In those confessions made in delirious pain, not a single person breathed a word about the 18 ships. No one revealed where the treasure had gone. They would rather burn to death on a wooden stake than reveal the final destination of the order. Why? Was it because what they were protecting wasn't just gold? Was it because on those ships were not just knights, but also royal bloodlines that needed protection? Secret heirs? And where is safe enough for such earth-shattering secrets? A place surrounded by walls of ice hundreds of meters high. A place where death is the most loyal guard. They may have gone south, very far south, to the land of Terra Australis. But could medieval humans survive in Antarctica? And more importantly, was Antarctica at that time actually completely frozen as it is now? The answer lies in the deep ice cores that we only managed to drill up in 2025. Ships, not shabby fishing boats. These were floating fortresses, the absolute peak of maritime engineering of the 14th century. They vanished from La Rochelle into the night, taking with them the best sailors, the greatest treasures, and a secret that could make all of Europe tremble. Mainstream historians, those sitting in warm libraries drinking tea, will tell you, "Oh, they fled to Scotland. They fled to Portugal." Really? You flee to your neighbor's house when the police are surrounding your home? Too naive. If you hold secrets that could topple the Pope, you don't find a hiding place. You find another world. Erase the image of knights who only know how to pray and swing swords from your head. The Knights Templar, in their 200 years of existence, had become something much more terrifying. Warrior scientists. Image. Overlay of complex mathematical geometry over a map of the Mediterranean. When they were in Jerusalem, they didn't just kill. They learned. They played with Arab numerals. They studied Jewish astronomy. They deciphered ancient Roman maps. They possessed portolan charts. Look at this thing. At a time when most European sailors were still hugging the coast for fear of falling off the edge of the world, the Templars had maps that were absurdly detailed. Rhumb lines crisscrossed like a spiderweb, allowing them to calculate precise angles across the vast ocean without seeing land. They knew about ocean currents. They knew about trade winds. Portuguese historians later had to admit the explosion of the Age of Discovery in the 15th century smells of the Templars, the ships of Vasco da Gama or Columbus. They sailed on routes the Templars might have charted 2 centuries prior. So, if you have the GPS technology of the Middle Ages and you have an unbeatable fleet at sea, where do you go to hide from the wrath of the French king? You go to where the maps of common men end. The ancient Greeks had a very interesting theory, and the Templars, addicts of ancient knowledge, certainly knew this. It was the theory of balance. They believed that if all the land was in the north, Europe, Asia, North Africa, the earth would flip over due to weight imbalance. Therefore, there must be a gigantic continent in the south to counterbalance it. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. For centuries it was just a myth, a blank space on the map marked, "Here be dragons." But what happens if the Templars didn't consider it a myth? What happens if, in the vaults beneath the Temple Mount, they found real proof, an ancient map of a lost civilization depicting the coastline of Antarctica before the ice covered it? Recall the Piri Reis map in Part 1. It is not a product of imagination, it is a copy of a copy, and the Templars were the intermediate link holding the original. They didn't go into the void. They followed a predetermined route to a place they believed was the final sanctuary. And this is where things get darker. Ask yourself, why risk going to the ends of the earth? To hide gold? Number gold is heavy and useless in a place with only penguins. You can't eat gold. The only thing worth protecting with one's life, the only thing that must be hidden absolutely, is people. More specifically, the bloodline. The Templars had extremely close ties to European royalty. They were godfathers, guardians, and bankers to kings. There is a hypothesis, a persistent whisper through the centuries, that the Templars held the secret of the Holy Grail. But in many esoteric texts, San Grail, Holy Grail, is actually a misspelling of sang real, royal blood. In the Middle Ages, bloodline was everything. A child with a disputed bloodline could cause a 100-year war. If the Templars were protecting a secret royal lineage, perhaps descendants of the kings of Jerusalem, or even an older bloodline that the church wanted to wipe out, they needed an absolute hideout. Not Scotland, not the Americas. Those places still had people, still had eyes and ears. They needed a dead place, a frozen tomb where they could hibernate, waiting for the day to return, a throne at the end of the world. Welcome to Antarctica. If Europe was a political furnace, Antarctica is God's refrigerator. Temperature, minus 89 degrees Celsius. Modern record, but olden times weren't much warmer. Wind, 320 kilometers per hour. Darkness. Lasts for 6 months continuously. This is not a place to live. This is a place to die. But paradoxically, that very death is the perfect protection. No king, no pope, no army dares to march here. If the Templars really came here, they bet everything on one gamble, that their ancient knowledge was correct. That somewhere amidst this desert of ice, there are geothermal pockets, underground caves, or ice-free valleys, as the Piri Reis map depicted. Imagine the scene: oak ships, sails tattered by storms, gliding past giant icebergs. Knights in rusting armor, staring at the white horizon, where compasses start spinning madly due to the south magnetic pole. Did they find the sanctuary? Or were they crushed by walls of ice, becoming eternally frozen mummies under miles of snow? You think this story sounds absurd? That Antarctica is just ice and more ice? That's what we thought. Until now. Year 2025. Our technology has finally caught up with the secrets of the past. Ice-penetrating satellites, ice core analysis, seabed mapping missions. What we are finding there is starting to match the Templars' impossible maps in a terrifying way. There are things under that ice that do not belong to nature, and there are chemical traces in the ice suggesting humans were there, burning fires and smelting metal, centuries before Amundsen or Scott set foot there. In the next part, we will leave hypotheses behind. We will talk with scientific evidence. I will show you what satellites have captured. And I will tell you why some governments today seem very worried about the ice melting in Antarctica. Not because of rising sea levels, but because of what is being exposed underneath. If If you want to hide a corpse, you bury it in the forest. If you want to hide a treasure, you bury it on a desert island. But if you want to hide a civilization, or the remnants of a truth the world is not ready to receive, you put it in a place where even bacteria are afraid to breed. Welcome back to minus 80 degrees cold. Put your coat on, because in this part, we won't talk about legends anymore. We will talk about deadly data. Let's go back to that freakish Piri Reis map. Conservative historians have laughed at it for decades. They said, it's just a coincidence. Piri Reis just drew South America curving downwards randomly. Really? Coincidence? I hate that word. A joint British-Swedish expedition went to Antarctica. They didn't bring swords. They brought dynamite and seismic equipment. They blew up the ice to see what lay beneath that mile-thick white shield. The result chilled them more than the wind. Beneath the massive ice of Queen Maud Land, they found mountain ranges. Nothing strange, right? Mountains are everywhere. But the problem is, those underwater mountain ranges lie exactly to the latitude where the 1513 Piri Reis map drew them. Piri Reis drew islands, bays, river mouths, and seismic scanners confirmed they are actually there, buried under millions of tons of ice. There is only one logical explanation for this. Someone, Piri Reis's original source material, saw Antarctica when it was not frozen, or at least not completely frozen. But Piri Reis wasn't the only one. Let me introduce you to another character, Oronce Finet. In 1531, this French mathematician drew a heart-shaped world map, and at the southern pole, he drew a massive continent named Terra Australis. What is the crazy part? He drew rivers. Rivers flowing from mountains to the sea, clear, coherent, detailed. What does modern science say? Ice core analysis, drilling down thousands of meters into the ice to sample air and dust from the past, reveals an ironic truth. Around 4000 BC, Antarctica may have experienced a brief warming period. The coastlines might have melted. Rivers might have flowed. If the Templars possessed maps from that era, maps passed down from Egypt, from the Phoenicians, or a lost maritime civilization like Atlantis, then their knowing the way there is no longer a miracle. It is an inheritance. Now let's talk about the present. Why did I mention the year 2025 at the start of the video? We are living in an era where secrets have nowhere to hide. LiDAR technology and multispectral satellite imagery are scanning Antarctica every day. They see through ice and snow like a doctor looking through your flesh with X-rays. Recently, independent researchers and anomaly hunters on Google Earth have discovered strange structures, unnatural square shapes, straight roads kilometers long submerged under snow, and most suspicious, thermal anomalies. Antarctica is the coldest place on Earth, but infrared satellites have detected hot spots. Scientists explain they are underwater volcanoes, geological activity. Fine. But what if the Templars knew this? This is the final puzzle piece to turn the impossible into the possible. How could 14th century humans survive there? They would freeze to death in 24 hours. Unless they didn't live on the ice. They lived beneath it. Antarctica has active volcanoes. Mount Erebus is still smoking. Around volcanic craters and lava tubes, temperatures can reach 25 degrees Celsius. A warm, humid ecosystem hidden under the deadly ice shell. Imagine the Templar ships, battered and freezing, finding an entrance to a massive coastal cave, a sanctuary, heated by the breath of the earth, a perfect hideout. No one sees their cooking smoke. No one sees their lights. They disappeared into the earth. But if they went there, why did they never come back? Why was no messenger sent back to Europe to say, hey, we're still alive, and we're raising penguins? There are two possibilities. Possibility 1, Antarctica killed them. Even finding a warm cave, the eternal darkness, isolation, lack of food, and cabin fever gradually destroyed them one by one. 18 ships became 18 ice coffins, the greatest mass grave in history. Possibility 2 is much scarier. That is, they survived, they rebuilt, they preserved the royal bloodline and ancient secrets, but they chose silence. Because the outside world, the world of King Philip, of the Pope, and later of atomic bombs, of world wars, did not deserve for them to return. They became the Watchers, hiding in the whiteness, waiting for the right time, and perhaps the unidentified flying objects, UFOs, that the military frequently reports seeing flying out of Antarctic waters do not come from another planet, but come from our own past. We've talked about parchment maps. We've talked about ghost ships and torture. We've talked about warm caves beneath the permafrost. But the most important question remains open. A question that, if I answer wrong, might get this video wiped from the internet by tomorrow morning. That question is, if they really went there, where are they now? Look at the current geopolitical reality. Antarctica is the only land on Earth that belongs to no one. No borders, no standing armies. In 1959, the world's greatest powers, guys who are normally ready to nuke each other over an oil field, suddenly sat down, held hands, and signed the Antarctic Treaty. They agreed, hey, let's leave this land alone. Scientific research only, no military, no mining. How noble. Or is it, they are establishing a quarantine zone? There is a theory that modern governments know what lies there. Maybe they found the ruins of the sanctuary built by the Templars. Or maybe they found things that are still alive. And the Antarctic Treaty isn't to protect the environment or some penguins. It is to stop you, ordinary citizens, from venturing there. To stop the curious from digging up secrets that could rewrite human history and religion. Back to the title of this video series, why 2025? Because we are living in an age where concealment becomes impossible. Throughout the 20th century, the ice layer was an unbreakable safe. But now, the Earth is warming, the ice is melting. And as the ice melts, Antarctica is spitting out its secrets. The latest reports from ice core analysis and high-resolution satellites in 2024 to 2025 are confirming crazy things: perfectly preserved prehistoric ecosystems, square geological structures exposed under melting snow, and most importantly, confirmation that the 1513 Piri Reis map was right. Modern science has finally admitted that the ancients knew things we have forgotten. That there was once a maritime civilization that traveled freely in Antarctica before the ice closed in. The Templars didn't invent Antarctica. They were just the last ones holding the map before the door slammed shut. So what was the fate of those 18 ships? Maybe they died. That is the most realistic scenario. But let me plant a more romantic and terrifying thought in your head. Remember the Templars' ultimate goal: protecting the royal bloodline. If they succeeded in establishing an underground colony, a frozen Shangri-La, then their descendants are still there, isolated from the plague, isolated from world wars, isolated from the decadence of modern society. They might have developed in a completely different direction from us, a branch of human civilization separated, preserving the ancient knowledge of Atlantis, of Egypt, and of the Templars. And who knows, the people we call aliens, the flying objects, UFOs, appearing from the polar seas, are not strangers. They are our lost brothers. They are the descendants of the knights who set sail on that fateful night in 1307. They are the Watchers, silently watching the outside world destroy itself while they are safe on their frozen throne. Do you believe in karma? Or, as the medieval rulers put it, God's punishment? Next, we will travel back in time to March 18th, 1314, Paris. A beautiful day for a barbecue. The victim? Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and Geoffroy de Charnay, his right-hand man, the one giving the order. King Philip IV, the Fair, or as I like to call him, Philip the Broke, and his puppet, Pope Clement V. Imagine the scene. Jacques de Molay, 70 years old, his flesh melting, but instead of screaming in pain, he shouts an invitation, a dinner invitation, in hell. God knows who is wrong and who has sinned. Soon a calamity will occur to those who have condemned us to death. Philip, Clement, I summon you to appear before the tribunal of God within a year. Sounds like a B-movie Hollywood script, right? But the truth is more ironic than fiction. Just a month later, Pope Clement died of disease. His insides felt like they were burning from within. And by November of that year, King Philip, the man who thought he had won this power chess match, suddenly fell from his horse during a hunting trip and died of unknown causes. The curse was fulfilled. Boom. Two of the most powerful men in Europe. Finished. But hey, we aren't here to discuss spirituality. We are here because of a math problem that doesn't add up. The torture and the stake might have killed the leaders, but it didn't kill the brain of the organization. And more importantly, it didn't find their massive wallet. King Philip thought that cutting off the snake's head would kill the body. Mistake. The Templars weren't just a knightly order. They were the world's first multinational corporation. Look at the chessboard. In Portugal, King Dinis, a pragmatist, did what? He simply told the knights, hey guys, change the sign. And so the Templars became the Order of Christ. Same people, same money, same knowledge. In Scotland, King Robert the Bruce, who was also excommunicated by the church, opened his arms to welcome the exiles. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? This network was too dispersed, too sophisticated. But what has made historians scratch their heads for the last 700 years isn't those who escaped on land. It is the story of the 18 ghost ships at the port of La Rochelle, the main naval base of the Templars. The night before the arrest warrant was executed, 18 heavy galley ships weighed anchor. They were never seen again. No customs records, no debris washing ashore. What did they carry? Gold and silver? Certainly. But gold is just metal. The more precious thing they carried was knowledge. Bank documents, secret files, and most importantly, maps. Where did they go? Scotland? Maybe. Portugal? Highly likely. The Americas? A fascinating hypothesis. But I want you, yes, you, to think like someone being hunted by the whole world. If you flee to a neighboring country, sooner or later diplomacy or war will drag you out. If you want to protect something forever, a royal bloodline, a religious secret, or a treasure of wisdom, you don't hide it where the enemy can look. You hide it where the enemy cannot imagine you would dare go. Look to the south, further than Africa, further than any common chart of the 14th century, the end of the world, where frost is an eternal wall. Antarctica. Sounds crazy, right? A bunch of knights in iron armor going to Antarctica in 1307. Before you laugh and turn off the video, remember, history is written by the victors, but the truth is often hidden in maps that the victors couldn't understand. To understand this journey, we must understand the men who stayed behind to die. Jacques de Molay, born in Burgundy, joined the order as a teenager. He was a soldier, not a politician. He was rigid, refusing to merge the Templars with other orders. His mistake was believing in honor in a world of old foxes, but his resilience on the stake showed one thing. He knew his sacrifice was necessary to create a distraction for a bigger plan. And Geoffroy de Charny, preceptor of Normandy, the man holding the keys to La Rochelle. If anyone knew where those 18 ships went, it was Charny. And here is an interesting detail. A man with the surname Charny later owned the Shroud of Turin. Coincidence? In my world, there are no coincidences. Charny was a logistics manager. He knew the fleet's capabilities well. He knew how far the ships could go, how much food they could carry. The fact that he accepted death without revealing the fleet's location proves that secret was more important than life. And then there was Guillaume de Beaujeu, the Grand Master before de Molay, a master spy. His intelligence network spanned the Middle East. He knew the day the Mamluk army would attack Acre in advance. You think a man like that didn't have a plan B? These men were not stupid fanatics. They were strategists thinking in centuries, not years. They possessed maps that shouldn't have existed. Maps depicting lands no one had set foot on. Or at least we think no one had set foot on. But where did those maps come from? And how, in the 16th century, could people draw exactly the rivers under the Antarctic ice? Something modern technology has only seen in recent decades. In chess, when the king is in check, you don't attack, you run. And if you are a grandmaster, you don't run to the next square. You flip the board and create a new game where the opponent can't see. We saw King Philip's motive, money and power. But the Templars' motive in the final days was much more complex. It wasn't just the survival instinct of a wounded animal, it was a high-level strategy. Why the South? Why the edge of the world? The answer lies in two things they valued more than gold: blood and time. Forget the glittering holy chalices. In the Middle Ages, the real holy grail was bloodline. The Templars weren't just a bank, they were the godfathers of Europe. They lent kings money, they held kings' money, and most importantly, they held the secrets of royal families. Imagine you are a cadet branch of the French royalty, or an illegitimate child with a claim to the throne but currently being hunted. You need to disappear, not flee to a neighboring country only to be extradited in a sack. You need a place where no army, no pope can reach. If the Templars possessed maps pointing to an invisible land in the south, that was the perfect refuge. A place to put the heirs into stasis. Wait for the political storm to pass. Wait 10 years, 50 years, or a century. You don't hide treasure under the bed. You hide it in an eternal ice vault. But how to get there? We are talking about a journey of 10,000 nautical miles in the 14th century. Don't underestimate these men in chainmail skirts. The Templars possessed the top scientific minds of the era. They learned mathematics from the Arabs, astronomy from the Jews, and maritime engineering from every port they visited. They knew how to calculate latitude from the stars when the familiar stars of the northern hemisphere sank below the horizon. But to go down to Antarctica, you have to cross the roaring 40s and the furious 50s. The wind there doesn't blow, it screams. The waves there don't lap, they smash ships. You can't go blindly into those waters. You would die in a single note. Unless you already had a map. Unless you knew exactly where the safe currents were, where the islands for resupply were, and where the ice-free harbors were. And this is where the story gets chilling. Did they have a map? Short answer, yes. Long answer, we are looking at maps that shouldn't exist. In 1929, in Istanbul, this was found. Admiral Piri Reis's map, drawn in 1513. He wrote clearly in the margin, "I did not draw this randomly. I compiled it from 20 ancient maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Look here. This is the coast of South America. Correct. And this? It extends down, curving. This is precisely Queen Maud Land of Antarctica. But wait. Modern science says Antarctica was discovered in 1820. Piri Reis drew it 300 years earlier. What's crazier? He drew it ice-free. He drew mountains, bays that today are buried under miles of snow and ice. In 1949, a British-Swedish expedition used sonar to measure the terrain under the ice. And guess what? They found mountain ranges in the exact same position as on Piri Reis's map. How? How could a 16th century Turkish admiral know the shape of a continent covered by ice for millions of years? Unless his source data came from a civilization that saw Antarctica before it froze. Or they had technology we don't know about. If Piri Reis isn't enough to give you chills, meet Oronteus Phineas, year 1531. He drew Antarctica completely. Not a faint strip of land, a complete continent. He drew rivers flowing from the interior to the sea. Today, those rivers are glaciers. But their positions? Accurate. He drew the Transantarctic mountains dividing the continent. Accurate. Mainstream history tells us these people just drew randomly and got lucky. Lucky? Drawing a continent no one had ever seen accurately with minuscule longitude/latitude error is luck. That is the probability of winning the lottery jackpot 10 times in a row. No. They copied. They copied from old crumbling documents, treasures hidden in the library of Alexandria, found by the Templars in Jerusalem, and carried onto the ghost ships at La Rochelle. The Templars didn't go into death. They followed the instructions of the ancients. They went south, holding in their hands a map of a lost world to build a new world. But if they arrived there, what did they find? A promised land or a frozen grave? And did any of them survive? If you thought the Piri Reis or Phineas maps were the peak of absurdity, then buckle up, because we are about to meet the final boss. Year 1737. Philippe Boache, a French geographer, released a map that made the scientific community of that time scoff, but makes geologists today break out in a cold sweat. Boache did not draw Antarctica as a unified landmass. He drew it as two large islands separated by a frozen waterway. For centuries, people thought he was wrong. Antarctica is a solid continental block. Everyone knows that, right? Wrong. It wasn't until 1958, the International Geophysical Year, that scientists conducted large-scale seismic surveys. And guess what they found under that kilometer-thick layer of ice? A massive strait submerged below sea level, actually dividing Antarctica into East Antarctica and West Antarctica. If the ice melted today, Antarctica would look exactly like what Boache drew in 1737. How did Philippe Boache know that? He didn't have ice-penetrating radar. He didn't have satellites. There is only one single explanation. He was copying a map drawn from an era when Antarctica had no ice. Or at least, the ice had not yet filled that strait. We are talking about thousands of years BC. Who kept those original maps for all those years? Who passed hand to hand those rotting scrolls containing the true shape of the earth? We often think the Templars were rich because they invented banking. True, but not enough. What did they spend their first 9 years in Jerusalem doing? There were only 9 knights, and they dug like moles beneath Solomon's temple. What did they find? The Holy Grail? The Ark of the Covenant? Maybe. But the most valuable thing they found was data. The ancient libraries of Alexandria, of Rome, of Constantinople. Much knowledge was lost in fires and wars. But the copies? The nautical charts of prehistoric civilizations? It is very likely they were hidden and found by the Templars. They immediately realized their strategic value. In the kingdom of the blind, the man with the map is king. When the Templar order collapsed in 1307, these parchment hard drives were the first things loaded onto the 18 ships in La Rochelle. Let's talk about Portugal, the safe haven. King Dinis did not kill the knights. He simply renamed them the Order of Christ. And who did this order subsequently sponsor? Prince Henry the Navigator, Vasco da Gama, the men who opened the Age of Discovery. Do you think Columbus or Vasco da Gama just set sail and prayed they wouldn't fall into the abyss? No. Piri Reis wrote in his notes, Columbus had the map in his hand before he left. They didn't go to discover something new. They went to reconfirm what the Templars already knew from ancient maps. It was a directed campaign of rediscovery. So the question arises, if they knew the way to the Americas, knew the way around Africa, did they know the way to the southern land, Terra Australis? Definitely yes. But why didn't they announce it? Let's go back to the 18 ghost ships. If you want to hide a hunted royal bloodline, you don't take them to the New World, the Americas, where Spain and Portugal would sooner or later fight over territory. You take them to a place no one wants to go. Antarctica is cold, harsh, but with medieval heating and construction technology. Don't forget the Norse lived in Greenland for centuries. Survival in volcanic caves or dry valleys in Antarctica is theoretically possible. Above all, it is absolutely safe. Geographic distance and a wall of ice are the world's best security system. Maps like those of Boache or Phineas are not just paper. They are keys. Keys leading to the world's blind spots. Shelters that time forgot. The Templars took the gold, took the royal blood, and took the knowledge. They went south. And then silence. A silence lasting 700 years. Someone once said, 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. But the Templars didn't just have 3 people. They had thousands of members, a network spanning continents, and a lost fleet. Yet for the past 700 years, not a sound. Why? The answer lies in the nature of the mission. If your purpose is preservation, preserving the bloodline, preserving knowledge, preserving your own existence against the persecution of the whole world, then success is not defined by returning in glory. Success is perfect disappearance. If the Templars really went to Antarctica or any remote refuge, they wouldn't send postcards home. But knowledge is like water. It always finds a crack to leak out. The maps we analyzed, Piri Reis, Phineas, Boache, they are those leaks. We know Piri Reis admitted to using ancient maps. We know the Order of Christ in Portugal inherited the Templars' assets. Maybe, just maybe, before vanishing into the mist, that fleet of 18 ships left a backup copy in Portugal. A set of instructions for the next generation. But what did the holders do? They kept silent. They used them to open the Age of Discovery, to monopolize trade routes, but they never revealed the true origin. Secrets birth power, and the Templars were masters of both. Let's return to the biggest question. Why Antarctica? Besides isolation, Antarctica is a natural freezer. If you want to preserve genes, seeds, or ancient texts, there is no better place. Today, we have the Svalbard Doomsday Vault in the Arctic to store seeds. Did the Templars, with thinking ahead of their time, consider Antarctica their own Doomsday Vault? They might not have built a glittering city of gold, But natural geothermal caves, ice-free dry valleys, McMurdo dry valleys, those are places where humans can survive. If they carried royal bloodlines needing protection, sangreal, royal blood, then living in seclusion at the edge of the world, waiting for the day the world becomes safe again, is not a bad scenario for desperate men. But perhaps they never returned. Perhaps the cold won. And what remains are just wooden ships crushed in the ice and skeletons in rusting armor waiting for future archaeologists. We often pride ourselves on our progress. We have satellites, nuclear icebreakers. We laugh at the ancients as superstitious. But look at those maps and tell me, who is the blind one? The existence of maps of Antarctica that are absurdly accurate forces us to face one of two uncomfortable truths. One, there was a lost advanced civilization that mapped the world thousands of years ago, and the Templars found their legacy. Or two, the Knights Templar made the greatest and maddest voyage in human history, surpassing Columbus, surpassing Magellan, to reach the ends of the earth. Whichever case it is, our history books are missing the most important pages. Pages that were torn out, burned on the sane island, or are lying cold under 3 kilometers of ice. De Mole cursed the king and the pope to die within a year. That curse came true. But perhaps the real curse wasn't death. The real curse is the haunting, the obsession they left for us, the descendants trying to piece the puzzle together from fragments. 18 ships, a frozen continent, and maps drawing the future from the past. Let's step back a little further. The 13th, 14th centuries, the era when textbook history says sailors only dared to hug the coast for fear of falling off the edge of the world. Yet, look at these portolan charts. The Dulcet map of 1339. It draws the Atlantic coastline and islands with a precision that I bet modern surveyors would raise an eyebrow at. The cartographers in Genoa and Venice at that time, they were drawing things they couldn't have known. Or at least, were not allowed to know according to mainstream history. It's like finding a blueprint for an iPhone in Tutankhamun's tomb. Something is wrong here. There was an underground stream of knowledge, an internet of the Middle Ages that we missed. And when you trace the breadcrumbs of this lost knowledge, all roads lead to one name. A name that, when mentioned, half of historians will frown at, and the other half will light up with excitement. The Knights Templar. If the people drawing these maps accessed the Templars' cloud data after the order was wiped out, then everything starts to make sense. But where is the proof? This is where things get interesting in a detective movie style. We are hunting ghosts. The Vatican secret archives. Just hearing the name smells like authorized personnel only. They still keep sealed areas containing documents too sensitive for curious public members like you and me to touch. Medieval inventories mention map collections that vanished without a trace. The French Royal Library once listed 14th century maps detailing southern lands, but where are they now? Evaporated. The Ottoman palace also held maps obtained from Christian sources, full of mysterious Latin symbols. But then the empire fell, and those maps also dissolved into the void. Every missing map is a piece stolen from the panorama, but fortunately, stone is harder to burn than paper. Let's go to Galway, England. An old Templar church. On the wall, carvings were found. Look closely. Those are constellations, but not the Big Dipper or the stars you see from London. Those are constellations in the southern hemisphere. Do you get what I mean? How could a stone carver in medieval England know what the sky above Antarctica looked like? Unless someone had been there and brought this knowledge back. And not just in England. In Tomar, Portugal, the Templar lair, the Church of Santa Maria do Olival is full of nautical symbols 100 years ahead of their time. They knew things they weren't supposed to know. Now, look down at the bottom of the world. The Sub-Antarctic islands, South Georgia, Kerguelen, places where dogs eat rocks, chickens eat gravel, utterly desolate, in the literal sense. What has archaeology found here? Wooden remnants with medieval carpentry techniques, controversial metal fragments. There is no sign saying, the Knights Templar were here. But these artifacts are screaming that humans set foot here much earlier than Christopher Columbus or Vasco da Gama dared to dream. And finally, look at the language of the maps themselves, the symbols. They aren't just for decoration. Researchers have recognized repeating patterns, specific crosses, architectural ratios, the arrangement of wind roses. They are like ciphers, suggestive winks for those in the industry. Maybe, just maybe, these maps didn't just direct spice trade routes. They might be pointing to sanctuaries, hiding places cleverly camouflaged under harmless brushstrokes. Of course, skepticism is necessary. A few coincidences might be random. A carving might just be a flight of imagination. But when you gather it all, Boache's map seeing through ice, absurdly accurate portolan charts, southern stars carved in stone in England, and wooden ruins in the frozen ocean, we have what is called a preponderance of anomalies. Too many impossible things are sitting right there. Something happened. A massive body of knowledge was placed in the wrong time in the flow of history. And to understand it, we must go back to that fateful day. The day the mighty Templar fleet suddenly vaporized. 18 ships left La Rochelle into the night of October, 1307. Where did they go? What did they carry? And more importantly, who was waiting for them on the other side of the horizon? "18 ships. That is not a small number. Imagine 18 Boeing 747s suddenly disappearing from radar at the same time. That is exactly what happened at the port of La Rochelle in October 1307. Right before the iron fist of the French king tightened around the Templars' throat, their fleet evaporated. Ships are not car keys you can accidentally drop in the couch cushions. They are huge, noisy, and expensive. They cannot vanish into thin air. They need ports, they need food, and most importantly, they need a destination. Mainstream historians, people who like everything tidy, will tell you they went to Scotland to help Robert the Bruce, or ran to Portugal to change their names. Sounds reasonable, and also safe. But what if those ships weren't seeking political safety? What if they were running from the old world itself? Let me take you onto the deck of one of those ships. Dark night, the deck is soaked and slippery under your feet. You are a seasoned sailor, but this trip smells wrong. The commander doesn't order a course north to misty Scotland, nor turn to sunny Portugal. He turns the helm south, straight south, into the waters that every common map marks with the words Hic sunt dracones. Here be dragons. Whispers start spreading among the crew. They talk of valleys shielded from the frost, of a refuge that the Pope and the French king could never reach. You don't know if it's truth or just the delusion of desperate men. But one thing you know for sure, the sky is changing. When the North Star disappears, you realize you have passed the safety limit of Europe. Welcome to the Southern Hemisphere. Now let's talk reality for a bit. Don't let romance fool you. Is such a trip in the 14th century feasible, or is it crazy science fiction? From La Rochelle to the Sub-Antarctic region is about 8,000 nautical miles. 2 months drifting at sea if Lady Luck smiles. Hard? Extremely? Impossible? No. The Templars weren't a bunch of amateur pirates. They were the logistics tycoons of the Middle Ages. They had money, the best ships, and most importantly, they might have held the Google Maps of that era. if their cartographers actually possessed secret charts showing ocean currents, monsoon directions, and stopovers like the Canary Islands, Cape Verde, or the lonely island of Tristan da Cunha, then this trip was completely within reach. They weren't groping in the dark, they were following a charted course. But what was the destination? The Antarctic continent. Let's be realistic. If they tried to build a stone castle deep in the interior of Antarctica in 1307, we would only find human-shaped ice statues today. Technology back then didn't allow humans to survive in that eternal refrigerator. But Antarctica isn't just eternal ice. Look at the Antarctic Peninsula and subpolar islands like South Georgia. Summer temperatures here can rise above freezing. There is fresh water. There are millions of seals and penguins. Apologies to animal lovers, but that is an abundant source of meat and fuel for survival. History has proven this. Seal hunters in the 19th century survived winters here with technology barely better than the Middle Ages. So the hypothesis here isn't that the Templars built a New York on ice, but a smarter strategy, a relay network. They didn't settle permanently. They created way stations, stockpiles, temporary bases for ships to dock, refuel, hide treasures or documents, and then set sail again. A mobile network. Imagine black ships drifting among icebergs, carrying the final secrets of a collapsed empire. A true hideout, not because of high walls and deep moats, but because it lies where no one is crazy enough to look. But to maintain such a network in secret for centuries, you can't rely just on ice and snow. You need allies on the mainland. Those who stayed in Europe. Those who wore new faces but kept the old loyalty. How did they hide this operation right under the nose of the Inquisition? The answer lies in the most spectacular transformation in history. You think the Templars died in 1312 when Pope Clement V put an end to them? Too naive. In the world of power, organizations don't die. They just restructure. Like a modern corporation hit by a media scandal. Fire the CEO, change the company name, redesign the logo, and continue business as if nothing happened. And nowhere executed this historic scam more spectacularly than Portugal. King Dinis of Portugal was a pragmatist. He looked at the massive wealth, the fleet of ships, and the strategic minds of the Templars in his territory and thought, why throw away these good things just because the Pope over in Rome is grumpy? In 1319, Dinis established the Order of Knights of Christ. Order of Christ. The name sounds fresh and holy. But look closely at the personnel. Templar assets, transferred to the new order. Templar Knights, just take off the old cloak, put on the new one, and boom, they became Knights of Christ. The headquarters was still located in Tomar, the old Templar stronghold. This was the most brazen and effective old wine in new bottles move in history. And here is the biggest clue, lying right before our eyes for the past 500 years. Look at the sails of the great explorers, Vasco da Gama, Prince Henry the Navigator. What symbol is fluttering on them? A red cross on a white background. That is exactly the symbol of the Templars. It is no coincidence that Portugal, a tiny nation, suddenly became the master of the oceans, opening the age of discovery. They didn't go blindly. They went by map. The Templar legacy wasn't gold. It was data. Secret charts transferred from the old order to the new one helped Portuguese captains round the Cape of Good Hope and reach India while the rest of Europe was still busy drawing dragons off the coast of the Atlantic. But if Portugal was the legal face, then Scotland was the rebel base. King Robert the Bruce, a man excommunicated, at war with England. To him, the Pope's enemy was a friend. Scotland became the perfect asylum for fleeing Templar knights. Go to Rosslyn Chapel, the place dubbed the Library in Stone. The Sinclair clan who built it had intimate ties to the Templars. Look at this. Botanists confirm this is a carving of corn, maize, and aloe vera. What is the problem? This chapel was finished in the mid-15th century. Columbus found the Americas and brought corn back to Europe in the late 15th century. How did a Scottish carver know what corn looked like before Columbus was born? Unless Henry Sinclair, the ancestor of this line, actually sailed to the New World in 1398, nearly a century before Columbus, based on maps the Templars brought. The proof lies in the stone, and stone doesn't know how to lie like humans. So how did this network work? How did they keep the secret of Antarctica or the Americas for so long? The answer is compartmentalization. It is a basic intelligence rule. The captain knows the route, but doesn't know what the cargo is. The financier in Italy, cunning Genoese or Venetian merchants, knows the cost, but doesn't know the final destination. The sponsoring family knows they are hiding someone, but doesn't know the whole plan. Knowledge was fragmented. Over time, these pieces began to disconnect. A map was copied, but the later draftsmen no longer understood the meaning of the original symbols. They drew Antarctica, drew islands, but only considered it legend or old reference material. That is why we have anomalies. Piri Reis drew a map from crumbling scraps he collected. Columbus was sure he would find land because he, being a Genoese, might have seen chart fragments leaked from the Templar archives. A massive underground network, ghost ships silently supplying southern outposts, an underground stream of knowledge shaping modern world history without anyone knowing. But the final question, the most important question, remains. What were they protecting? If those ships really went south to frozen lands, what did they carry that was worth trading the entire order's life and existence for? Not just gold. Gold can be buried anywhere. The thing they carried had to be much more precious than gold. Can you smell it? The smell of burning parchment, the smell of ink boiling and evaporating, the smell of history being erased. Before dawn on October 13th, 1307 could break. Before King Philip the Fair's soldiers could break down the doors, Templar monasteries across France were engulfed in smoke. They didn't wait to be arrested. They acted. Witnesses recounted black columns of smoke rising from the backyards of Templar buildings. When royal soldiers stormed in, ledgers, missing pages, treasury, empty, library, only dust-covered shelves remained. What did they burn? Wheat receipts? No one burns supermarket receipts when they're about to die. They burned dangerous things, secrets that could shake both the throne and the papacy if revealed. And what they didn't burn, they took away. We return to the wildest but most haunting hypothesis. Antarctica. If that lost fleet took the true treasure of the Templars to the south, what was that treasure? Gold? Sorry. But if you are running for your life, gold is just a useless heavy rock. The most precious thing they needed to protect, according to clues scattered in ancient documents, might have been lineage. Texts hint at royal bloodlines needing refuge. Some conspiracy theories, yes, I know you're thinking of the Da Vinci Code, but be patient, suggest the Templars held proof of a sacred bloodline, or ancient texts refuting the Church's power at that time. Imagine the fate of those people. Nobles used to living in silk, proud knights, now huddled in primitive bunkers on South Georgia Island, or the edge of the Antarctic Peninsula. What were they waiting for? They were waiting for the day to return, waiting for the political storm in Europe to pass. They protected their Ark of the Covenant at the ends of the earth, believing that one day the order would rise and bring them home. But History is much crueler than fiction. Maybe. That day never came. Support networks in Europe gradually broke down. The secret holders grew old and died. Children born in the frost grew up no longer clearly remembering their forefathers' original purpose. Knowledge became legend. Legend became fairy tale. And fairy tales vanished into the howling southern wind. A sanctuary became a tomb. Perhaps Boachi's maps, Piri Reis's chart fragments were just final testaments. Messages in a bottle sent back from a miniature civilization that withered in isolation. This is the tragedy of secrecy. When you hide something too well, sometimes you hide it from yourself. You bury it so deep that no one, not even your descendants, can find it again. So, what is the final answer? Is there a treasure trove of knowledge, or even relics of Solomon's temple lying under that mile-thick ice? We have impossible maps. We have a lost fleet. We have unexplainable archaeological traces. Those are pieces of a picture we haven't dared to look at directly. Antarctica is melting. The ice is retreating. Every year, the eternal white shell gets a little thinner. Maybe, just maybe, we don't need to speculate wildly anymore. Nature will soon return what humans entrusted to it. And when the final layer of ice melts, what is revealed might rewrite the entire history you were taught in school. Or it will just be silence, the cold and eternal silence of those who dared to challenge the limits of the world. (1312). Imagine you are standing in the middle of Europe, where the air is thick with the smell of betrayal and smoke from the pyres. It was the year Pope Clement V, a man acting in God's name but behaving like a ruthless CEO liquidating the competition, finally signed the death warrant for the Knights Templar. The papal bull for dissolution was issued, but this wasn't just about confiscating gold or land. Oh no, gold is easy to count, land is easy to divide. What Clement V and King Philip of France craved most, but also feared most, was information. The decree explicitly stated, all property must be transferred to the Hospitallers, and more importantly, archives must be collected and protected. Sounds noble, right? Protecting records to prevent loss? Don't be so naive. In the language of power, protect means control, and preventing loss actually means preventing the truth from leaking out. They wanted to lock the Templars' knowledge in an iron cage, the key deep in the pocket of the Pope and the crown. But you know, history is like water. The tighter you try to grasp it, the more it slips through your fingers. How successful was this knowledge harvesting campaign? A magnificent mess. In France, where King Philip was most bloodthirsty and money-thirsty, the persecution swept through like a storm, destroying everything. Documents evaporated, files vanished. A purge so thorough one wonders if they used fire to archive them. But elsewhere, where kings ruled with a suggestive wink, things were different. The suppression was half-hearted, like a clumsy play. Here, documents didn't die, they just moved house. They crawled into private collections, slipped into the libraries of curious nobles, or were reborn under a new name. Typically in Portugal, where the Templars simply changed their cloaks, renaming themselves the Order of Christ. New bottle, but the wine was the same old brew, aged for 1,000 years and full of secrets. And this is where our story gets interesting and darker. Let's talk about the maps. In the medieval world, a map wasn't just a piece of paper for directions. It was the nuclear weapon of that era. An accurate nautical chart was worth more than a chest full of diamonds. Why? Because it contained strategic information. But scarier still, it revealed the scope of knowledge. Imagine this. You are a European king, believing the world is confined around the Mediterranean. Then suddenly, you hold in your hand a Templar parchment detailing distant southern coastlines, lands no one has ever heard of. What is your feeling? Excitement? Certainly. But immediately followed by a chill down your spine. How did these warrior monks know that? A map contradicting the Church's official narrative, where the earth is the center and all lands are God-ordained in the Bible, is a heretical map. It represents a deadly danger. Therefore, the fate of these maps became a mystery frustratingly obscure. Some, the obedient and useful ones, were quietly merged into royal archives. They lay there in the dark, secretly used by kings for later explorations, while the public had no idea of their origin. A grand plagiarism of history. Others, too, controversial. Perhaps those depicting Antarctica or the Americas centuries before Columbus was born, were destroyed, torn apart, burned, or worse. They disappeared along with the Templar ships fleeing into the night, taken to secret hideouts and still lying there, waiting. Now, look towards Rome, the Vatican secret archives. The name says it all. It exists like a black hole in the heart of history. Although they recently cracked the door open a bit for scholars, there remain sealed sections, doors that never open, shelves that if you touch, you might disappear faster than a Templar knight in 1307. Inventories mention documents about the Templar trial minutes, administrative papers. But the true scale? No one knows. If charts from Templar preceptories were confiscated and sent to Rome, logically they must be there. But are they still there? Or were they moved, or destroyed by some pope afraid of what they depicted? The Vatican has a long tradition, reluctantly providing access to what is controversial. Their silence is the most fertile ground for conspiracy theories to sprout. But there is a way to erase knowledge even more sophisticated, more ruthless than burning books. It is the break in oral tradition. The Templars weren't bookworms just bent over writing. They were practitioners. Their maritime knowledge was living knowledge, passed from master to apprentice right on the deck amidst the roar of waves and howling wind. When the 1312 decree struck, this chain was severed. The master navigators, those who held the map of secret currents in their heads, died at the stake, died in dungeons, or died of old age in hiding. They took the routes to their graves. The map readers, the only ones who understood the meaning of mysterious symbols, astronomical signs, or architectural icons on the charts, passed away without passing on the trade. A star symbol on a map could be a guide to a treasure, or a deadly current, or a new land. But when the person who knew how to read it died, that symbol returned to being a meaningless drawing. This natural erosion destroyed more information than any arson. It removed context. It turned surviving maps into silent pictures, understood by no one, and therefore believed by no one. However, the ghosts of those maps still haunt European libraries. In 14th and 15th century inventories of the French Royal Library, chilling descriptions were found. Map showing southern lands outside known territories. Or in the Ottoman Palace Library, map of Christian origin detailing Antarctica. They were once there, listed, described, and now vanished, without a trace. Was it fire, theft, or some invisible hand cleaning up before humanity officially discovered Antarctica in 1820? If a Templar map depicting the Antarctic coast existed in the 14th century, it would pose an extremely uncomfortable question. Who was there before us? Royal governments don't like such questions. They want the discovery to be theirs, the glory to be theirs. Proof of prior knowledge by an outcast organization would shake the legitimacy of all sovereignty claims. Thus, information is hidden not just by hiding it, but by stripping away context. An accurate map is labeled error or fantasy. An important navigational symbol is deemed decoration. This dismissal is far more effective than physical destruction. It kills the truth right before your eyes without leaving a bloodstain. But ladies and gentlemen, silence is never absolute. When a secret is buried, it doesn't die. It just waits. Welcome back. Are you cold? Good, because we are heading into the coldest land on Earth, both literally and figuratively. If you think the disappearance of Templar maps in Part 1 was just a thing of the past, a dusty tragedy in a museum, you are sorely mistaken. That silence did not end in the 14th century. It lasts until today, right as I'm speaking to you, in the form of a legal monster named the Antarctic Treaty System. On the surface, this treaty looks like an agreement of nature lovers. Let's protect the environment. Let's save the penguins. Sounds very humane. But look closer at the fine print. This treaty doesn't just control littering. It controls access. It dictates who goes where, and more importantly, who is allowed to publish what. Imagine an independent expedition, not government affiliated, not belonging to approved organizations, accidentally finds an ancient stone ruin jutting out from the melting ice, an architecture not of nature, a trace of pre-modern humans. Do you think they can live stream it to Facebook immediately? Forget it. The verification process will trigger a massive bureaucratic machine involving multiple government and scientific agencies. Information will be shaped, delayed, filtered through countless censorship membranes. If that information is too controversial, for example, proof that the Templars were here 500 years before James Cook or Bellingshausen, it will be deemed a national security threat. Why? Because it rewrites history. And history, ladies and gentlemen, is the foundation of power. There is an interesting detail in the files I found. The year 2025. Hypotheses about authenticated Templar maps are mentioning this year. Maybe, just maybe, new satellite imaging technology is starting to pierce the permafrost, revealing geographical features eerily matching the erroneous charts of the 14th century. But will those images reach your phone screen? Or will they be blocked by the firewall of skepticism and pre-review processes? The question is, why hide it so carefully? Is it just for the honor of historians? No. The motive is always much more practical: legitimacy and territory. If the Templars truly assisted fleeing European royal bloodlines and established a refuge in Antarctica or South America, this revelation would be an atomic bomb thrown at modern genealogical claims. Kings, queens, powerful families sitting on current thrones, are they the only legitimate heirs? Or is there another branch, another bloodline waiting in the shadows? And if Antarctic exploration took place as early as the 13th century, then all territorial claims of modern powers based on first discovery in the 19th century become worthless. You see, silence isn't always a conspiracy. Sometimes it's institutional cowardice, the reluctance to admit, we were wrong. It comes from lazy skepticism, dismissing all anomalous evidence instead of examining it. But let's put that frozen ice aside for a moment. Let's go back to 1307 to see what happened when the Templar Bank collapsed. When Philip IV of France sent troops to arrest the Knights at dawn on Friday the 13th, he didn't just attack a religious order. He pulled the plug on the international financial system. The Templars were the World Bank of the Middle Ages. They held the money of kings, popes, and merchants. They invented checks, credit, international transfers. When Philip confiscated their assets, he created a catastrophic liquidity crisis. Imagine you are a wealthy count. Your entire fortune is in the Templar vaults in Paris. The next morning you wake up and realize, The bank is closed forever. The bank manager is being tortured, and your account evaporated. Nobles went broke overnight. Merchants went bankrupt. The European economy wobbled like a rudderless ship. But here is the most spectacular twist, a joke of fate for King Philip. Utter disappointment. Philip attacked the Templars because he owed them too much money, and he coveted their treasure. He dreamed of rooms flooded with gold, enough to pay off national debt and live luxuriously for life. But when his soldiers broke down the treasury doors, what did they find? Very little. Much less than he imagined. Much less than the account books. The difference between expected assets and actual confiscated assets is the clearest proof that the Templars were one step ahead. They knew. They dispersed liquid assets, gold, silver, gems, before the royal soldiers could knock. Philip wanted to rob a bank, but the safe was empty. He was still drowning in debt, plus the infamy of a god betrayer. And his death in 1314, just a short time after Jacques de Molay was burned alive and uttered the famous curse, made contemporaries believe even more. This was God's punishment. But to me, it was the failure of a stupid, greedy man. So where did the assets go? This suppression inadvertently created a great asset redistribution, reshaping the map of European power. In Portugal, King Dinis I, a man much smarter than Philip, did not destroy the Templars. He just renamed them. Templar assets were transferred intact to the newly founded Order of Christ. This was the capital, the angel investor, for the later age of discovery. Portugal became the master of the oceans thanks to the money, and perhaps maps, of the Templars. In Scotland, fleeing knights were sheltered by nobles, bringing military expertise and perhaps secret chests of gold. In Spain, assets flowed into other military orders, changing the balance of the Reconquista War. Every gold coin transferred, every inch of land changing hands carried a bigger question. Besides money and land, what else was transferred? Documents, maps, secrets about hideouts across the ocean, underground networks. The Templar persecution taught Europe a bloody lesson. No one is untouchable. It created a chilling effect. Other organizations shrank back, submitting to royalty. But it also created an extremely dangerous exile community. Elite warriors, master accountants, sharp diplomats now became mercenaries, advisors, wanderers. They dispersed, but did they lose contact? Or did they form an underground internet of the 14th century? An invisible network preserving what remained of the Templars, waiting for the day to rise. If such a network existed, it is the key explaining the strange maritime explosion that occurred right after. And that, my friend, is where we go next, to ghostly ships and lands never known yet clearly visible on parchment. Welcome back. If in the previous part we saw the Templars' money evaporate, in this part we will witness a greater magic trick, the disappearance of people. Put yourself in the shoes of a Templar knight in 1307. Yesterday you were a warrior of God, respected, feared. Today you are hunted, a heretic, prey. What do? You cannot fight all of Europe. You have a single choice: become invisible. Those who escaped the bloody purge learned a core survival lesson. Survival depends on leaving no trace, no campfires, no carving names on rocks, and most importantly, absolute silence about the destination. This was the birth of a culture of secrecy. It wasn't a romantic choice like in movies. It was survival instinct. Information about escape routes, hiding islands, buried document caches. All was only whispered among the most trusted brothers. It was passed down through tightly controlled channels, wrapped in layers of camouflage and misdirection. But think about the cost. Think about the children. Children born in isolated hideouts. Perhaps a deep valley in the Alps, a remote castle in Scotland, or some desolate coast in the New World. They grew up with their father's legacy, knowing they belonged to a lineage of holy warriors, but completely disconnected from the real world. They lived suspended between a glorious past impossible to reclaim and a lonely present, imprisoned by waiting. The psychology of these exile communities was extremely complex. They weren't just fleeing, they were biding their time. And the mandate of secrecy became their new religion, shaping how this network operated for centuries. And this is where history becomes chaotic, an intentional chaos. Immediately after the Templars collapsed, a thick fog of fabricated stories began to cover Europe. On one side were the church and crown, striving to propagate that the Templars were devil worshippers, spitters on the cross. On the other were underground supporters, painting them as martyrs, innocent victims of greed. The truth? Probably lies somewhere in between. The Templars might have been arrogant, but they weren't heretics in the way accused. But this controversy, this narrative chaos, was the perfect shield. You want to hide a tree? Plant it in a forest. You want to hide a historical secret? Create a forest of legends. When people are busy arguing whether the Templars worshipped the goat-head Baphomet or not, they forget to ask, where did their ships go? When people are engrossed in stories about the Holy Grail or Solomon's treasure, they won't pay attention to the nautical charts being silently copied. The cloud of legend provided cover. Within a generation, the Templars shifted from a flesh-and-blood military organization to legendary characters. They became ghosts in European folklore. People told of knights sleeping inside mountains, waiting to wake, of secret valleys, of misty southern lands. Are these just fairy tales told for fun by the fireplace? Or are they distorted memories of real hideouts? Now look at Portugal. This is not a fairy tale. This is history recorded in black ink on white paper. In 1319, just 7 years after the Templars were dissolved, the Order of Christ was established. Their logo? A red cross on a white background, identical to the Templars. Their headquarters? At Tamar, the old Templar fortress. Their personnel? Ex-Templar Knights. And what happened right after that? Portugal's maritime expansion accelerated suddenly and terrifyingly. Portuguese navigators under the flag of the Order of Christ began plunging into the Atlantic, the deadly ocean where people believed dragons and abysses existed. But they went with a strange confidence. This confidence wasn't the recklessness of adventurers. It was the certainty of people who knew the way. They seemed to grasp trade wind patterns, complex current systems, and the locations of distant islands. Things you would have to spend hundreds of years of trial and error to find out. But they got it right from the start. Why? The most logical answer: they were using the Templars' textbook. Templar resources funded the ships, but Templar knowledge, confiscated or salvaged charts, was what steered them, and not just Portugal. Look at Italy. In the 14th and 15th centuries, right after the Templars disbanded, the Italian map-making tradition suddenly took a leap in accuracy. Port-o-land charts appeared, but scarier were the impossible maps. There are maps from this era depicting lands, not yet allowed to exist. The Americas? There are traces. Antarctica. There are details of the coastline that should have been under ice. These maps were described as showing southern lands outside known territories. Think about Christopher Columbus. This man didn't go looking for India blindly. There is plenty of evidence suggesting he possessed charts hinting at western lands. He married the daughter of a knight of the Order of Christ in Portugal. He had access to his father-in-law's archives. Could the great age of discovery, the pride of the West, actually be just the process of publicizing secrets the Templars held a century prior? This is a hidden gift, a legacy from the grave of a persecuted order, handed back to the world that killed them. But the story of Antarctica goes deeper than that. Maps depicting Antarctica before 1820 aren't just proof of maritime ability. They are anachronisms. If the Templars, or their source, could draw an ice-free Antarctic coast, then we are talking about a much more ancient type of knowledge. Knowledge from an era when Earth's climate was very different. And if the Templars were the guardians of that ancient repository of knowledge, then choosing Antarctica as the final refuge is no longer crazy. It is a homecoming. But how did these legends survive the Age of Reason? How did they infiltrate Freemasonry and pop culture? And most importantly, what physical traces remain on that frozen continent challenging modern historians? Do you believe in reincarnation? I'm not talking about people. I'm talking about organizations. When the Templars were beheaded in the 14th century, their ghost didn't vanish. It found a new body to inhabit. 17th and 18th centuries, Europe entered the Age of Enlightenment, but in the shadows, secret societies began springing up like mushrooms, and most prominent among them, Freemasonry. These Freemasons claimed to inherit the legacy of Solomon's temple builders. But look closely at their rituals, knightly ranks, Red Cross symbols, and most importantly, the obsession with lost knowledge. Many Masonic branches openly claim to be spiritual descendants, and sometimes blood descendants, of the Knights Templar. Is this historical fact or just a genius branding campaign? Probably both. But what matters isn't whether they truly held hands across 400 years. What matters is, the Templar legend provided a powerful origin story. It turned the Templars from outcast heretics into great ancestors, holding ancient wisdom and sacred geometry. Through these secret societies, Templar symbols spread globally, weaving into the architecture of Washington, D.C., into revolutions, and into modern politics. But that is the surface story. Let's return to our obsession, Antarctica. When humanity officially began exploring Antarctica seriously in the 19th century, they thought they were the first to set foot on another planet. But imagine the horror of an explorer when he, amidst a deadly land never before trodden by man, stumbles upon a piece of worked wood, or crazier, ancient cannons. Scattered reports from the 18th and 19th centuries speak of these findings. Wood fragments that seem to have been hewn with iron tools, metal objects in impossible places. What does mainstream science do? They do what they do best: deny. It's just driftwood. That's a natural rock formation that looks like a cannon. They are forced to deny, because if they admit a medieval ship was there, all history books must be rewritten. But the oral histories of indigenous South Americans don't lie. They tell of white men coming from the sea, heading towards the frozen southern lands long before Cook or Bellingshausen set sail. If the Knights Templar, or those they sponsored, truly went there, they left traces that we, arrogant latecomers, are seeing but refusing to understand. And then, pop culture stepped in. 19th, 20th centuries. The Templars exploded in Gothic novels, movies, detective stories. Edgar Allan Poe wrote about polar mysteries. Hollywood made movies about national treasures. Do you think this helps clarify the truth? No, it buries the truth deeper. By turning the Templars into mythical characters with magic, with immortal holy grails, society stripped away their reality. When you hear the Templars hid treasure in Antarctica, you laugh and think of Indiana Jones movies. You don't think of a real migration campaign. This mythologization is the most perfect camouflage. It turns history into fairy tales, and no one looks for truth in fairy tales. So finally, what are we left with? The most powerful order in Europe disappearing overnight, a fleet of ships missing without a trace, 14th century maps drawing Antarctica eerily accurately, and a frozen continent locked down by international treaties and Vatican silence. This is a historian's nightmare. How to face evidence lying in the gray zone, things too obvious to ignore, but too crazy to accept. The Templars' greatest legacy isn't gold, isn't land. It is the doubt they left behind. They force every generation of ours to ask, what do we really know about the past? Is history what happened, or just what the victors allow us to remember? When words fail, when texts are burned, when witnesses are burned alive, then symbols will speak, maps will whisper, and silence. Silence is sometimes the loudest answer. Did the Templars die, or did they simply go where no one dared to follow? The answer, my dear friend, might be lying under 3 kilometers of Antarctic ice, or it lies right before your eyes, on the $1 bill, on skyscrapers, and in the fictional stories you watch every day. Do you believe in coincidence? That a 12th century architect accidentally built a window perfectly aligned with a star never named? Or a drunk cartographer accidentally drew the exact coastline of a continent that humanity hadn't found for 500 years after? Look at this symbol. The patty cross of the Knights Templar, edges expanding from center to rim. To believers, it's a symbol of martyrdom, but to a navigator, it is a tool. The Knights Templar weren't just guys in white cloaks swinging swords. They were the first bankers, diplomats, and most importantly, master navigators. Where do you think they hid the gold? In a hole in the backyard? No. They hid their greatest treasure, knowledge, right before our eyes. In buildings, in texts, and in the very maps we naively think are just for decoration. Let's talk about lifeless stone walls. Modern researchers, with laser scanners and simulation software, have begun to realize something strange when surveying Templar sites. Repeating wall angles, room proportions following strict mathematical rules. Windows aren't just for light, they are miniature observatories, marking the exact position of the sun and constellations on important days. Is this just aesthetics? Or is it a language? Imagine this. You hold the secret to a maritime route leading to a new land, containing the survival of the entire order. You can't write it down in common Latin, something any of the Pope's mercenaries could read. What do? You build that map into your very house. Historians are still arguing whether these patterns are data encryption. But look at the Portolan charts, ancient nautical maps. Do you see the compass roses scattered all over them? Their proportions and angles match eerily with the architecture of Templar churches. That is not random. That is synchronization. A knight walking into a church in Paris might be looking at the same key code, drawn on the parchment of a captain drifting in the middle of the Atlantic. Now, I want you to close your eyes. No. Open your eyes and imagine with me. We are in a damp room in a coastal fortress in the 13th century. Outside, waves crash against the cliffs. Inside, only flickering candlelight. You are a high-ranking Templar knight. Before you is an old parchment map. Your finger traces black ink lines. The coastline looks familiar, but your eyes stop at the southern lands, where the church says only monsters and abysses exist. But on this map, there are strange signs. Why are there 3 crosses arranged in a triangle right at this river mouth? Why is that compass rose arm unusually long and pointing straight at a coral reef? To a layman, It's a drawing error. But you have been trained. You know the code. 3 crosses, not a church. That is a freshwater reserve. Skewed compass, rose arm. That is the only safe passage through the reef. Red on the map, not blood, but a deadly danger warning. And then, we have the famous Piri Reis map. Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral, admitted he copied from older sources. Sources connected to the Templars. Look at the bottom of the map. Antarctica. But not the frozen Antarctica of today, but a land with rivers, mountains, and even crosses. Piri Reis didn't know what they meant, but if those crosses are a Templar legacy, they aren't decorative drawings. They are coordinates, maybe refugee points, maybe supply caches hidden for doomsday. A plan B, the greatest in history. You think when the Templars dissolved in 1312, their knowledge died with them? Too naive. They just changed cloak colors. In Portugal, they became the Order of Christ. Order of Christ. Visit the Church of Santa Maria do Olival in Tomar. The carvings here don't tell of saints. They depict navigational instruments. They depict constellations. The later Manueline style exploded with motifs of ropes, anchors, and celestial bodies. Researchers call it art. I call it a navigational textbook carved in stone so no one could burn it. And here is the knockout punch. Go to the church in Galway, England. On those cold stone walls, carvings depicting constellations were found. But not constellations you see in London or Paris. Those are constellations in the southern hemisphere. Let that sink in for a moment. How in the Middle Ages could masons in England carve the exact position of stars invisible from their latitude? Unless they had been there, or they possessed knowledge from those who had sailed to the other side of the equator. We see the golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence appearing everywhere, in the spacing between church columns, and strangely, in the spacing between stopovers on Portolan charts. Is this worship of God's beauty, or is it a way to compress data, a visual language transcending language barriers? You don't need to know Portuguese or Latin to understand the map. You just need to understand Templar mathematics, a perfect encryption system to survive purges. But the biggest question remains. If they had the map, if they knew the way, and if they prepared sanctuaries marked by red crosses on frozen lands, where did they go? What treasure did the ships leaving La Rochelle on that fateful night in 1307 carry? And more importantly, which way did they point their prows? Towards misty Scotland? Or towards a distant land in the far south, where the strange stars on the Galway church ceiling are shining? Welcome back. Don't let this modern look fool you. These screens aren't showing the future. They are showing the past, a deep past to which we have been blind for centuries, until now. Year 2025, just last year, was a seismic year for archaeology, even if the mainstream press seemed busier with celebrity scandals. Ice-penetrating radar technology and high-resolution satellite imagery have reached godlike levels. We are no longer looking at the Antarctic ice. We are looking through it. And guess what we see? A slap in the face to history textbooks. Look at this screen. This is the actual terrain of Antarctica lying beneath kilometers of ice and snow. Ridges, deep valleys, winding ancient riverbeds. Now, look to the right. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, based on old documents of the Knights Templar and Christopher Columbus. Do you feel the chill down your spine yet? The coastline on the 16th century parchment matches eerily with the coastline beneath the ice that 2025 satellites just redrew. How? How could a medieval mapmaker, sitting by candlelight, know the shape of a continent before it was buried in frost? There are two possibilities. Aliens. Sounds fun, but I'm not selling tinfoil hats here. Humans were there, and they were there when Antarctica wasn't a white hell. Conservative historians will scream, coincidence. Oh yes, a coincidence accurate to the latitude. Trust me, if I throw a handful of spaghetti on the wall, it never forms a map of the New York subway. But the story is crazier than that. Not just land shape. It's about climate. Ice cores drilled deep into the Antarctic heart have brought up things that shouldn't exist. Pollen. Ancient pollen. From warm-loving plants. What does this mean? It means this deadly land, at some point in the not-too-distant past, geologically speaking, was once green. If the Templars' source maps depicted flowing rivers and natural harbors in Antarctica, perhaps they weren't drawing from imagination. They were copying materials from an era when Antarctica was a place humans could live, or at least visit. This pushes the mystery back thousands of years. Maybe the Knights Templar didn't discover it. They were the great librarians, those who found and protected the maps of a lost maritime civilization, those who sailed when Antarctica was a green paradise. Let's leave the main continent for a moment. Let's go to the Sub-Antarctic islands, lonely, harsh rocks in the ocean where wind screams year-round. No one lives there. Never, right? Wrong. Recent surveys on these uninhabited islands have found interesting things. Stone structures stacked not by nature, decayed worked wood pieces, and metal. These artifacts, when carbon dated, seem much older than the official date humans set foot here. Mainstream archaeology is sweating bullets. They try to explain it as driftwood or traces of 19th century whalers. But look closely at their positions. They are in strategic spots, observation points, natural shelters, like way stations. If you are running a secret fleet heading south, you need supply stations. You need fresh water. You need ship repairs. These islands aren't random places. They are gas stations on the highway to the end of the world. And if Templar maps marked these locations, the red crosses we talked about in part 1, then the question is no longer, did they know? The question is, what did they do there? Some newly discovered geological anomalies look very much like eroded artificial structures, ruins of an ancient civilization, or traces of a temporary settlement of exiled knights. The ice is melting, folks. Climate change is a disaster, but for truth seekers, it is a cruel gift. Every meter of retreating ice reveals a torn page of history, and I bet the Knights Templar are laughing at us from their graves, waiting for us to find what they left behind. Every great magician knows one principle: misdirection. While the audience glues their eyes to the waving right hand, the left hand performs the miracle. Friday the 13th, 1307. King Philip the Fair of France, a broke and greedy king, ordered the arrest of all Knights Templar. That was the right hand. All of Europe watched the flames burning the knights alive, but they missed the left hand. At the port of La Rochelle, in that chaotic night, 18 ships of the Templar fleet quietly weighed anchor, and then disappeared. No docking records, no drifting debris. 18 large ships filled with the most elite knights and the most mysterious treasures, vaporized from the face of the earth. You don't lose a set of car keys, and you certainly don't accidentally lose an entire naval fleet, unless you don't want anyone to find you. It is time we stop viewing the Knights Templar as medieval butchers holding swords. Modern history, after shedding its arrogance, has finally admitted a truth. The Templars were the NASA of the 13th century. They were the first bankers, sharp diplomats, and most importantly, master navigators. While other European sailors were still hugging the coast for fear of falling off the edge of the world, the Templars possessed the technology, money, and astronomical knowledge to cross oceans. They weren't groping in the dark. They went with a purpose. The question is, where did the La Rochelle fleet go? The Scotland hypothesis? Maybe. Portugal? Highly likely. But 18 ships are too many for a mere asylum run, and if they possessed the map leading to the southern land we discussed in Part 2, then perhaps their destination was much further away, a place where the hands of King Philip and the Pope could not reach. So, what was on those ghost ships? Gold? The Holy Grail? I have a more interesting theory. People. The 13th and 14th centuries were an era of bloody purges. Royal bloodlines like the House of Anjou, the Counts of Champagne, or Scottish nobles were facing extinction. The Templars didn't just protect their money, the Templars protected their blood. Imagine, you are a hunted noble. You need a shelter. Not a castle in a neighboring country, but a place that disappears completely from the map. Antarctica, or the Sub-Antarctic islands, with pre-prepared supply stations, would be the perfect hideout. A medieval version of a doomsday bunker. And here is what gives me goosebumps. DNA. Today, genetic technology can trace ancestry with terrifying precision. If those refugees survived, procreated, and later reintegrated into the civilized world, perhaps in South America or Oceania, then the genetic marker of European royal blood is still flowing in the veins of ordinary people today without them even knowing it. Zorro, you're speculating, you might say. Fine, let's look at hard evidence. Maps. This is the Waldseemüller map of 1507. It depicts the Atlantic. Good. It depicts the Americas. Good. But wait, it depicts the Pacific Ocean separating the Americas and Asia. What is the problem? The problem is that Europeans allegedly never saw the Pacific Ocean until Balboa crossed Panama in 1513, 6 years after this map was drawn. How did Waldseemüller know there was an ocean there? Why do medieval maps depict islands in the Atlantic, like the Azores or Madeira, in the correct positions centuries before they were officially discovered? That is not prophecy. That is old data. Data from those who had been there. People belonging to a secret maritime network of which the Templars were the final heirs. We know that the Knights Templar had a habit of oral tradition. Ears hear, eyes see, mouth shuts. But they also had massive archives. When captured, many documents were burned. But remember the 18 ships. They didn't carry clothes. They carried knowledge, original maps, records of ocean currents, coordinates of safe harbors in Antarctica. The absence of original documents in European archives does not prove they do not exist. It proves they were moved. We are facing a massive historical void, an abyss where knowledge was lost. But what is lost can still be found, especially when the ice is melting and technology is advancing at the speed of light. Do you hear anything? That isn't just the sound of melting ice. It is the sound of a countdown clock. Every giant block of ice calving from the Antarctic continent brings two things. One is rising sea levels threatening to drown our cities, and two is opportunity, the final opportunity to see what has been hidden for millennia. We are living in a strange golden age of archaeology. Climate change is doing the work of thousands of snow shovels. Ancient coastlines are being exposed. Islands once buried are emerging. And the question of the Knights Templar legacy is no longer just idle tea-house gossip. It is a race. We talked about ice-penetrating radar, but in 2025, our most powerful weapon isn't hardware, it is data. Independent researchers, internet sleuths sitting in their bedrooms, are using AI to scan millions of fragments of medieval and Renaissance maps. Before, the naked human eye might have missed a slight resemblance, but computers don't. Algorithms are pointing out that the match between the Antarctic coastline on the Piri Reis map and actual topographical data is statistically too precise to be considered random. That precision doesn't come from luck. It comes from copying. Copying from source maps that we, arrogant modern people, have lost. However, this is also a double-edged sword. The internet has democratized secrets. Alongside shocking discoveries, we are also flooded with the garbage of conspiracy theories. Aliens, Nazi bases, or Atlantis under the ice. Our mission is to brush aside that filthy foam to find the underground current of historical truth. That ancient humans were smarter and traveled much further than we imagine. If the Knights Templar truly went to Antarctica, or possessed maps of it, then where is the final physical evidence? Under the ice. If they built temporary shelters of wood or stone, the frost is both a protector and a destroyer. When the ice retreats, these artifacts will be exposed to air and decompose extremely quickly. We have an extremely narrow time window to find them before they turn to dust. In royal archives, remember, not all Templar documents were burned. Some were confiscated. Perhaps the original map is lying gathering dust in a dark corner of the Vatican library, or mistakenly clipped into a tax file in Portugal labeled as worthless. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is just proof that we haven't looked in the right place. We often look back at the Middle Ages as a dark, ignorant era. They thought the earth was flat. We sneer. But in reality, those men in red-crossed cloaks ran a multinational corporation, invented the checking banking system, and built cathedrals that defied gravity. Why do we find it hard to believe they knew how to set sail following the southern stars? The question, did they know about Antarctica, is actually a mirror reflecting ourselves. It exposes massive holes in our knowledge of maritime history. We don't know what was lost when the Library of Alexandria burned, or when the Templar archives turned to ash. So, ultimately what? Did the Knights Templar hide the Holy Grail in Antarctica? Did they migrate there to protect the bloodline of Jesus? Or was it all just the accidental ink strokes of a 16th century drunkard? The truth might lie somewhere between these extremes. Maybe they didn't settle permanently. Maybe they just used that knowledge as a final, emergency exit they never truly needed to use on a large scale. Or maybe they came, they saw, and decided that this world was not ready to know. But one thing is certain. The story isn't over. Year 2025 is just the beginning. As the ice continues to melt, Antarctica will tell its story. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next year, a satellite will scan a perfectly square geometric structure emerging from the melting snow. And when that happens, we will... When a man dies, his memory dies with him. But when an entire empire is slaughtered, what disappears is not just people. It is the how. Imagine this. You are the only person who knows how to fly a spaceship, and then, boom, you die. That spaceship is now just a useless lump of metal to the rest. That is exactly what happened to the Templars. Superior maritime techniques, skills to read the southern stars, methods to decipher squiggly symbols on ancient parchments. All that software was deleted permanently when the hardware, that is, the brains of the Grand Masters, was crushed on the French king's torture machines. We are talking about a break in the chain of succession. If Templar navigators truly possessed the map leading to the White Land, Antarctica, and if they knew how to read it, then that knowledge died the moment the Order disbanded. But this is where the story gets ironic, and honestly a bit ridiculous. Centuries of speculation, tons of paper and ink, tens of thousands of hours of debate on forums ranging from academic to conspiracy. But where is the evidence? Nothing. Zero. Nada. The hypothesis of Templars in Antarctica has hovered like a ghost in the research community for decades. Common logic, the thing you and I both love, says, if an army of thousands, with ships, horses, and metal, went somewhere, they must leave traces. We humans have a natural talent. Do you know what it is? It is littering. Wherever we go, we leave marks. Broken pottery shards, rusty nails, animal bones, or even a tent peg. Yet in Antarctica, the absence of evidence is so deafening, it's suspicious. This absence could mean this hypothesis is just garbage. A wild dream of romantics who want to believe the holy warriors didn't all die. Or the evidence has been hidden. Don't be naive enough to believe science is always objective. Resistance from conservative institutions is the most solid fortress wall. They don't want to rewrite history. They fear what lies under that ice will overturn the world order they painstakingly built. Or simpler, we aren't skilled enough, rich enough, or crazy enough to dig in the right spot. So, what would count as solid enough evidence? A Templar map, clearly depicting Antarctica, dating back to the Middle Ages. Sounds appealing, but even if I handed it to you right now, would you believe it? No. Scientists would tear it apart. Fake, 19th century ink. Coincidence. Authenticating such an artifact is a forensic nightmare. What about archaeological evidence? If a sword engraved with a red cross is found under the permafrost, oh, that's when the fun really starts. But we have to rule out every other possibility. A later shipwreck? 19th century explorers carrying antiques? The deeper you dig, the wider the hole gets. Every answer spawns 3 new questions. Every piece of evidence is covered by a fog of uncertainty. These gaps aren't just a lack of data. They are fundamental challenges to the arrogance of modern man. We are confident we know everything about the ancients, but the truth is, we know nothing. But my friend, the biggest mystery here isn't whether they reached Antarctica or not, nor is it about whether they protected a royal bloodline or the Holy Grail. The question that really keeps me awake is, why won't this story die? Why? There is something, a ripple in the historical record, a strange pattern in ancient maps, an underlying logic in the disappearance of the Templar fleet. It keeps pulling investigators back, like moths to a flame. It whispers in our ears that the story in textbooks is a lie, or at least a truncated truth, that the darkest secrets are still lying there, in the ice, in the dark, and in absolute silence. And speaking of silence, sometimes silence doesn't mean nothing. Silence is the loudest scream of a secret waiting to be released. Do you hear anything? No? Good. That is the sound of safety. For the past 7 centuries, this secret has been protected not by steel locks, not by fire-breathing dragons, but by a weapon 1,000 times more effective. Silence. We live in an age where everyone screams for attention. But for the Templar Knights on those fleeing ships years ago, fame meant death. They pulled off the greatest deep dive in history. They chose silence over justification, chose secrecy over glory. Think like a professional fugitive for a second. If they really found a hideout, let's assume Antarctica or some desolate island, what is the stupidest thing they could do? Right, brag about it. Revelation invites the hounds. Paper records create a fatal weakness. If the public knows, then the so-called hideout is just a tourist spot waiting to be ravaged. Therefore, their silence wasn't just a tactical need, it was a philosophy of survival. They understood a brutal truth that we moderns have forgotten. Some truths can only exist when never spoken. Some legacies only endure when buried. This silence is not empty, my friend. It is thick. It is full of deadly potential. It is like snow falling on Antarctic ice, accumulating, layer upon layer, until everything beneath disappears completely from sight and human memory. Look at these maps. They are locked tight in archives. The symbols on them are staring at researchers silently. They seem to challenge, you don't have the key, you will never understand. That is the silence of a broken oral tradition. When the last person who understood the code took their final breath without leaving a testament, that knowledge died. Forever. But here is the strange part. Cultural memory operates in a very weird way. When there are no official documents, imagination begins to take the throne. The Knights Templar. They live in our heads more vividly than any king or emperor of the same era. Even though their historical records were wiped clean, their ghosts still haunt every corner. They occupy a massive space in the collective imagination. Why? Because they represent the unknown. They are symbols of forbidden knowledge, of underground power. The Antarctica hypothesis. It seduces us not because it has ironclad evidence, but because it rationalizes our fears and hopes. That the most important truths aren't hidden by CIA or Vatican conspiracies, but by distance, by isolation, by thousands of miles of deadly ice. Ice. It is both the jailer and the executioner. It preserves everything. Ancient pollen, prehistoric air bubbles, and perhaps even humans who lost their way. But ice also crushes everything. It moves. It grinds. It erases. Ice behaves exactly like human memory, keeping what it wants and crushing what it doesn't need. So, if the Templars left a legacy, what is it? Is it gold, silver, jewelry? I'm afraid not. Their true legacy is much more subtle, and it leads us to a quite headache-inducing philosophical question in the next part, about blood. What the hell is a legacy? Is it a bronze statue erected for you in the square for birds to defecate on every day? Is it your name given to a street with perpetual traffic jams, or piles of rotting papers in a library? No. Those things are too mundane. To the Templars, if they really played the big game in Antarctica, their legacy isn't stone, isn't paper. Their legacy is blood. Lineage. It carries two burdens, literal and symbolic. Biologically, this is a living archive. Imagine it. Human bodies carrying genealogical information, carrying the blood of kings, of God, if you believe the Holy Grail legend, trudging forward through time, preserved in the giant refrigerator of Earth, Antarctica. But symbolically, this is the interesting part. Medieval people were obsessed with blood. To them, where you were born determined what you were, not what you could do, but whose blood was flowing in your veins. If the Templars protected a royal bloodline at the ends of the earth, then the legacy they left behind isn't flesh and blood children. They left behind a divine continuity, a flame kept burning in a blizzard. But this leads you and me to a rather thorny ethical question. What do we owe the past? Do we have the right to overturn every grave, scrutinize every secret the ancients intentionally buried? Or is there wisdom in respecting silence? Maybe the Templars were right. Maybe some things need to be hidden. We, The curious ones of the 21st century are walking a fine line between seeking truth and violating dying wishes. The ethics of disclosure are having a big fight with the ethics of knowledge. And trust me, there is no referee in this match. And speaking of things timeless, let's talk about the greatest liars in history, maps. A map is a strange object, don't you think? It represents reality, but it is not reality. It is a work of art, a political statement, and sometimes a confession. Medieval maps are a spectacular gray area. They were both navigational tools and holy scriptures. If a Templar map depicting the Antarctic coastline exists, it isn't just paper. It is a ticking time bomb. It is a beautiful object, but also undeniable proof that we are dead wrong about the history of exploration. It is a vessel carrying knowledge across space and time. But remember this, a truth is only a truth when there is a witness. The role of the witness is extremely important. If the Knights Templar went to Antarctica, saw the majestic ice mountains that no European had ever seen, but then they died there. No one returned. No one recounted it. Then did that journey really happen? Testimony needs listeners. Truth told to deaf ears is no different from silence. The witnesses are dead. The words they wanted to say were carried away by the wind. And what remains for us are just fragments, rumors, the crazy hypotheses I am telling you here. Structures collapse, documents burn to ash. But there is one thing that survives more persistently than cockroaches. That is the question. That itching sensation in the brain that mainstream history is hiding something from you. The Templar Antarctic mystery exists not because the evidence is plentiful, but the opposite. Because it hits the fatal weakness of humans. The desire to believe that our ancestors were greater than we imagine. That in the darkness out there, someone is waiting. We have come a long way, haven't we? From dark dungeons in France through crazy Renaissance maps to the ends of the earth. You have followed me through 7 centuries of silence and rumors, but I have bad news for you. This journey, it doesn't end here, because mysteries of this kind never have a neat Hollywood ending. There is no kissing scene under the sunset. It opens up deeper holes. It invites a specific type of person. That is you. This invitation is for you. Don't just sit there being a passive audience, listening to me tell stories like a lullaby. Become a seeker. What does it mean to be a seeker? It means you must be as skeptical as a grumpy old man, yet as open as a child. You must demand ironclad evidence, but also be alert enough to recognize anomalies that the crowd ignores. It is about looking at old maps with fresh eyes. Why does the coastline curve like that? Why is the scale strangely distorted? Could it be the draftsman's error, or is it a desperate attempt to record a changing land? The answer to the Templar mystery might not be in history books. It might be lying in a genetics lab, in a climatological ice core sample, or under soil and rock that archaeologists have never bothered to look at. Don't believe blindly in textbooks. Read widely. Connect the dots. 7 centuries, 700 years. Why do we still care? Why do the Templar ghost ships keep sailing in our heads? Perhaps because it scratches an itch in human nature. We loathe mediocrity. We want to believe the past holds more miracles than dry numbers. And let's be honest, the image of warrior monks holding God's secrets, hiding on the planet's deadliest continent, it's too cool to be forgotten. And then there is the bloodline. Whether literal, the DNA of kings flowing in the veins of some office worker who doesn't even know it, or figurative, traditions preserved in secret societies like Freemasonry. History refuses to lie still in its coffin. It constantly rises from the grave, erupting into our present. Look at those maps again. Piri Reis, Orontius Phineas, Boache. They are still lying there, in museums, patiently waiting. They don't change, but we change. Our technology is catching up. AI, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating scans. Those maps are waiting for the moment when technology, expertise, and madness converge enough to unlock their secrets. Or to prove it all just a joke of coincidence. Whatever the result, it will settle the matter. But until then, think about what lies beneath my feet. Ice drifts slowly, but it drifts constantly. It carries everything out to sea. If there are Templar artifacts down here, they are in a strange quantum state, both preserved and being crushed. Every year, the ice melts a little. Technology gets a little better. The probability of finding something increases a little. That is why this mystery lives forever. Because it always lies in the zone of possibility. No one can prove it right, but no one dares to confirm it is completely wrong. What if questions don't demand belief? They demand courage. What if they really had knowledge from an ancient civilization? What if a royal bloodline is actually hibernating in the frost? What if medieval people traveled thousands of miles further than we imagine? What if secrets are kept not because someone hid them, but simply because the world is too big and we are too small? The whispers of the Antarctic wind. They speak of ice and fire, of crosses on nameless shores, of chosen silence. The wind is screaming over lands no one has set foot on. It wipes away every trace. It creates a perfect whiteness to hide every sin and glory. Beneath that ice is rock, the skeleton of the continent. Did human hands ever touch that skeleton in the 14th century? Are there skeletons in armor hugging each other under miles of ice and snow? I don't know, and neither do you. But the mystery knows it is still there, patient as stone, cold as ice. It is waiting for you. Zorro! Silence at the end of the world is sometimes the loudest answer. Welcome to Dark History. Keep doubting, keep searching,